Hello, welcome to Mike's Mets podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pashota. Happy Friday to you. So we are coming up on the Mets home opener today. We will be able to see the Mets in Citi Field playing for the first time this season. And I'm sorry that we didn't do recaps for the Milwaukee Brewers series, but they were so terrible that I was so disillusioned. I almost I didn't want to be a Met fan anymore. I'm kidding, but it was pretty bad. It was probably the worst series I've seen in some time. I don't think I saw a series that bad all of last year. So to watch it this early on, it does feel like a little ominous, and you hope that's not going to be the case for the entire year. It was just, in all situations, it was just a terrible series. I mean, you're blown out in back-to-back games by the Milwaukee Brewers, and then you're playing pretty well in the third game, but keep letting the Brewers come back into it, and then finally seeing the Brewers walk it off in Game 3. Pretty rough. I didn't really know what to make of the entire series other than the first two games there was really nothing to talk about, and that was actually kind of the reason why I didn't do any kind of recaps for those two games was nothing happened. They just didn't do anything in back-to-back games, the first two games of that series. And watching that, I was just like, what do I say? Like, they suck. Like, it was like they gave terrible performances, and then Game 3, you had Scherzer on the mound, and Scherzer, let's see, it's hard to say really what exactly was the worst part of it. I'm going to say the fact that he didn't really get through any type of large portion of the game, and then, of course, gives up the 3 home runs. I'm sorry, I'm talking about Game 2. But Game 3, in that series, you see the Mets kind of trying to perform in a way that would be a little bit more appropriate. They're pitching decently better. David Pearson was the pitcher for Game 3, and he's doing okay. It's just really like Peterson can just not get it out of his own way, and just the 5 walks. I mean, really just not pitching as sharp as he was last year, which was a huge help to the Mets. Especially when they were having injury difficulties. And this year, his first 2 starts just has looked very inconsistent in terms of his mechanics. They need better performance, and this has just been sort of what's been happening for the entire season, as short as it's been for 7 games. It's just been the Mets starters failing to go very deep in these games. We've seen them go, I don't think, longer than like 6 1/3 this inning. I have to check that, but I don't think we've had a starter go into the 7th inning thus far this season. Or maybe that will change with Tyler McGill on the mound today, but we have to pray, I guess, to see if McGill is going to be able to make a better start than he did. And how ironic is it that Tyler McGill is going to make his second start with the Mets home opener back-to-back seasons now that he's going to be starting the Mets home opener, and seeing that, it's pretty remarkable. They really need to get off on the right foot here, and McGill is going to be instrumental to that. His performance, he needs to be consistent in terms of what he's doing, and the Mets pitching coach Jeremy Hefner, he's got to be out there just telling them, you have to be consistent in what you're doing, or else they're just going to be screwed. And looking at Max Scherzer 2 nights ago, when he pitched, it was troubling. The back-to-back home runs, 3 consecutive home runs allowed to the Milwaukee Brewers, who I really didn't think that much of going into the season. I thought they would be a wild card contender. I think I said that on this podcast, but to see them just absolutely obliterate the Mets in back-to-back games and then blow the game after the Mets had gotten a lead in that third game, it was tough to see, and then especially tough to see Scherzer, who had pitched well in that first game on opening day before getting into a little bit of trouble late. His approach was just really off, and I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with Scherzer, and I don't think you can really blame it on the pitch clock, although he has been very resistant to it, and this has been sort of the approach for every other Mets starter who has long term, who is not just Mets starters, actually every other MLB starter who has a lot of years in the league, and they're used to pitching a specific way. It's an adjustment period. He has to get adjusted to it. He has to get to adjust to it fast because he is the Mets ace, and they need him to be pitching like an ace pitcher, not giving up 3 consecutive home runs, which was just, honestly pathetic. It was really just bad to watch, and it undid this great performance by Pete Alonso, who really stood out in that third game against the Brewers. You saw the Mets all of a sudden starting to hit with a little bit more authority. It was a good game for Francisco Lindor, and things just it was really just a bullpen that's been really overworked. I think that at this point they've gotten a lot of time, but they're also they're missing their leader closer Edwin Diaz, and a lot of guys have had to step up, and it's caused a situation where you have guys who are pitching probably more than they were expecting to. They've had to lean a lot more on Drew Smith, more than they've probably wanted to. Adam Ottavino was the one who blew the game, technically got the loss when he gave up the walk-off home run in the ninth inning in that third game. And again, there was things to like about what they did in that third game. I like that the bats seemed to come alive a little bit more. They managed 7 base hits, 6 runs. The big games were for Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso. Lindor went 3 for 4, drove in a couple of batters, had 2 doubles in the game. And then Pete Alonso, of course, a pair of home runs, drove in 4 batters. That seemed to really get him off the snide, and I was glad to see that because Pete's going to be a big part of the lineup this year, and it's a big year for Pete because he's going to be hunting for an extension for the Mets also pretty soon. So, a lot to like about what we're going to eventually get from that. I do believe Alonso will be one of the MLB leaders in home runs. Not a hard prediction to make, but Alonso will be critical for the team, and especially Lindor. Lindor, who's having a really rough go of it, even more so than Alonso. And Lindor seems to have kind of, if we're going to take that third game as a indication of where he potentially could go, I think Lindor could be starting to get out of it. We'll see how he does in this game coming up against the Marlins. So, important game, home opener. The Mets are 3-4 after starting the year 3-1. Unfortunately, getting swept by the Brewers put them behind the 8 ball, so to speak. So, they need to really recover. They have probably most important game that they're going to have early this year, other than opening day. So, trying to get out over it, it'll be important. It'll be Tyler McGill versus Edward Cabrera, and Edward Cabrera, the Mets hit pretty well last time that they saw him. I think they could do something similar in this game. We'll hope to see the Mets lineup starting to come alive a little bit more. And it'll be critical. The Mets lineup, if they're shut out, I don't really know quite what we're getting with the pitching staff right now. And just a slew of injuries. The other big news was Omar Narvaez is going to be out for an extended period of time. Because of this, they have opted to call up Francisco Alvarez, the Mets' top prospect. So the call-up of Alvarez means that we now have the Mets' elite catcher of the future, starting as the catcher of present. And how long Alvarez stays up here is entirely dependent on how well he performs. Now, when the Mets brought him up last year for a brief cup of coffee late, Alvarez was okay. I mean, he really didn't get that much time to really show off what he was doing in terms of his performance. But you saw flashes. You hope he's going to improve upon that. Narvaez will be out for an extended period of time. It's a severe calf strain is what they have put it in. He was placed on the 10-day IL. They're expecting him potentially to be out for a longer time, and they did adjust that to be him being on the sidelined for potentially 8 to 9 weeks. We'll see how long exactly they're intending to do that for, but they're expecting he might be done until June. Not great for the Mets, who were, Narvaez was actually one of the few Mets who was really contributing offensively, and seemed to have filled a niche that they really needed at the catching spot offensively, especially with Tomas Nido being basically useless. So Francisco Alvarez now taking over in that spot. It's important to see the Mets youth movement. People have decried the Mets for not really taking the time to be more cognizant that the Mets prospect group deserves the time that maybe the veterans do not. Guys like Tim LeCastro and Darren Ruff when he was still in the mix of things, and then Eduardo Escobar, and people are still calling for Brett Beatty to eventually replace Eduardo Escobar once he has returned from his finger injury. We hope to see that soon as well, but Francisco Alvarez will be the first salvo, so to speak, of the Mets' young talent group that's expected to be up this year. I very much expect Beatty to join him pretty soon. And then potentially Mark Vientos, who's also been hitting very well in AAA. And I also should mention Ronnie Mauricio, who's done a great job hitting, and he's been very under the radar. He was at one point considered a top prospect with the Mets, but just hasn't really been in the mix as much because of guys like Alvarez and Beatty and Vientos sort of taking over the spotlight. So Ronnie Mauricio potentially could be around at some point as well if there's any kind of injuries in the middle infield. Mauricio has shown that he is a very talented middle infielder, not like super talented. He's I think above average shortstop, but his his bat has just really impressed a lot of people. He has a real authority with the power. I think he transitions probably better to third base, maybe a DH spot. There is the chance of that as well. So there is a lot of offensive power in the Mets' future. It's just a matter of, are the Mets actually going to pull the trigger and bring these guys up? So we'll see how that goes. This season hasn't really gotten off to the start that we wanted as Met fans, but it has to be said that we are still only 7 games in. I expect they will perform much better as the year goes by. Just in terms of not just the pitching staff, but the lineup as well. And this is all a matter of adjustments. People adjust faster than others to the much faster game. It's going to be very different for a lot of people. And the Mets have to adjust better than others because now they are behind the ball. They are under 500. They need to right themselves. And this is an important game. And they have to do it in front of their home fans for the first time. It's going to be a lot of excitement, a lot of energy in the place. Tyler McGill is going to be, probably feeling it early on. It's a matter of how well he performs for the season. I do think McGill has talent. He looked okay in that first game. You just wanted him to fine tune a little bit and make it so that he could right himself a little bit easier. And he got bailed out a couple of times. There were a couple of times he bailed himself out, and it's a matter of making sure that he can do that again. And facing the Marlins again so soon, it does lend its own challenges. They've already seen him pitch. They're familiar with his entire repertoire. They've seen him live pitch in front of them. So, and it was only a week ago, so they are pretty familiar with what McGill can do. So I expect that this game will probably have some offensive fireworks. I don't expect a terrific performance from McGill, but I do expect him to battle, and I do expect the Mets lineup to perform better than they had in those first 2 games of the Brewers. I want to see a little bit more of what we saw in that third game, where we saw the bats start to liven up, and we saw the big guys, Lindor and Alonso, really starting to hit like we know they can. We know that Lindor and Alonso are all-star caliber players. We know that they have that potential. We know they have that ability. We need them to show that, and we need the rest of the lineup to get on with it as well, because we can't have these shutout games where the lineup looks lethargic, they look out of place, they're not hitting well. They need to get out of it, and especially with the Braves getting off to such a hot start. The Braves are 6-1, and this division race could get really out of control if the Mets don't right themselves and get on a winning path soon. So a lot of things to look at. I'm excited to see the Mets playing at Citi Field again. It'll be a wonderful thing to see. I do love seeing the Mets play at Citi Field, and I know all Met fans love that. So to see it again so soon in the year, I'm really looking forward to it. I expect this will be a good matchup, and expect the Mets to win this one. I certainly hope they do, because going now 3-5 would not be ideal, and losing your first game in front of a home crowd, not fun either. So let's hope that they do right themselves, and that they have found the way to start winning soon, because it's early on already, the pressure kind of starting for the Mets to be on the right path, and the amount of money that was spent to make it building this team, it can increase the amount of pressure that they're certainly feeling. Certainly everybody's feeling at this point. And there's going to be a lot of hard looks and hard decisions that the Mets are going to have to make going forward. Already they've gotten hit by more than their fair share of the injury bug. They got pretty lucky last year, but early on this year, feeling it hard. But it just means that maybe that if they are starting off so injury bug, are already getting the injury bug so early on, maybe they can kind of get it all out early in the way, and maybe later on in the year everybody starts being a little bit more healthy. So we'll see how that goes today, but I am looking forward to it. I do love Mets baseball being played at Citi Field, and I'm really looking forward to this game. It's going to be a great game, I think, and what we see from the Mets in this game could be a major part of how we see them performing for the remainder of the season. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you for listening to Mike's Mets podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike's Mets Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.